All right, so we're going to continue here, and we talked about the Boston Massacre. Now we're going to talk about the Tea Party. I mean, the Tea Party. Listen to me. The Boston Tea Party, and of course, that's where the Tea Party today, the Tea Party movement, came from. And what is interesting is again the um, let's see here. The Tea Act, which was passed by Parliament in 1773, would actually make tea cheaper. So the price of tea would go down. So just like when we talked about the Sugar Act, how it actually lowered the tax on sugar, and you would think that people would be happy about that. In this, same thing here. Okay, the Tea Act would lower the price of tea. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, the Tea Act allowed the British East India Company to sell directly to the colonies. And before, what they would have to do is if they were bringing tea from India or wherever, they would have to go to England, pay a tax there, and then they would have to go to America and pay a tax there. And so it became, it would by the time consumers got the price was pretty high. But in this case, there was still a tax attached to it, but only in the colonies. And so realizing that this was kind of a cunning plan because it would, there was a boycott on tea. All right, you remember when they repealed the Townshend Acts. All right, they repealed the tax on everything except for tea. And so they continued this boycott on tea. And so there were people like our buddy old Sam Adams who was afraid that the um, the colonists, this would destroy the boycott on tea, and it would sort of confirm England's right to tax the colonies in this way. Okay, so what he did was he got some of his, when I say he, talking about Sam Adams, he got some of his people together, and on December 16th, 1773, um, after drinking rum all day, they dressed up as Indians, and you can see that right here if you notice. And they boarded a ship in the Boston Harbor, and they threw uh, 9,000 pounds of tea, or 340 chests of tea leaves, into the Boston Harbor. You can see that right there. I guess all the fish, probably got a caffeine rush. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Apologize. All right. So, this is something that was this kind of stuff was going on all over the colonies, especially New York and places like that. But this is what really became famous, the Boston Tea Party. Um, Now, the British were outraged. Okay, even common people in Britain said, what European power would dare to do to Britain what the Boston rabble, or that's a word they use for trash, have done. I mean, they felt that they were destroying British property. And so, therefore, the Parliament passed the Coercive Acts. All right, or what's known as the Intolerable Acts. And basically, it pretty much took um, any kind of autonomy that Massachusetts had, all right, away. Okay. For example, okay, this was the coercive acts were a number of acts. Okay, put together. One was the Port Act. The Boston Port Act, which closed Boston's port, preventing food and other essential items from entering the city until it agreed to pay for the tea. And of course, Sam Adams and others made it sound like, people in Boston were starving to death or something, which was not the case. Another act changed Massachusetts' charter to increase royal power over the colony. The king would now appoint both the council, and you don't have to remember all this, but this just gives you an idea of what was going on, which was the upper branch of the legislature, and the sheriffs, who chose the juries. And town meetings could only be held once a year. So it changed Massachusetts charter, which basically took away their autonomy, their political autonomy. So again, you can see here it's sort of economic here, and here you can say it's political. Okay. Still another act stipulated that enforcement officials now listen to this, charged with killing colonials would be tried in England. All right. Killed a colonist would be tried in England. Now, when I say someone here, I mean any British official. So this was looked upon as kind of like a license to kill, kind of like 007. I mean, for me, I hate watching James Bond movies because when I watch them, it's like watching myself, the whole time. So you know how like you hate to see yourself on camera or listen to your voice, like I never listen to my lectures because it drives me. That's the way it is. Like when I watch these James Bond movies, it just reminds me of those years, in my life that I can't really talk about. And obviously I became a history teacher later. But anyway, all right, let's move on. Okay, so this was, obviously something that upset a lot of people. They also passed around the same time the Quebec Act. All right, now what the Quebec Act did, though not again, it wasn't really considered the coercive act part of the coercive acts in England, but the Americans kind of viewed it as part of the intolerable acts. The act not only guaranteed religious freedom to the French Catholics in Canada. This was bad enough to the numerous like anti-Catholics that were in America, but also added the northern part of the Ohio River Valley to the province of Quebec. And so this really upset a lot of Americans, and they were like, wait a minute, again, this is why the French and Indian War was fought in the first place. Okay? Upset a lot of people. Now, what were the reactions? Well, immediately after, um, well, well, let me back up just a little bit and tell you that um, one of the things that they also did was put when I say they, Great Britain, they put Thomas Gage um, in charge of the military in Boston to enforce all these things, and basically almost gave him carte blanche to do pretty much anything. All right. So he arrived with the troops. The Patriots established their own government, featuring their own provisional Congress and president. John Hancock, for example, was a president. He was from Salem, Massachusetts. Some people said that nothing rash should be done. Others, like Sam Adams, retorted that if nothing were done then, Americans would grow accustomed to paying illegal taxes, and royal officials would become entrenched um, in power. Which maybe he had a point there. Um, But anyway, eventually, 55 delegates from 12 of the colonies, Georgia was absent, got together in Philadelphia for the first Continental Congress. This was September 5th, 1774. Whoops, oh no. All right, 1774, First Continental Congress. And the Congress had no power to legislate, only to advise the individual legislatures in the colonies. And Sam Adams's friend had to give the poor man a suit so that he would not go to Congress looking all ragged and everything. In his single-minded quest for independence, Sam Adams had neglected his. He was. By the way, that's where Sam Adams beer comes from. He had a brewery, and he pretty much neglected it, and he never really cared too much about money. He's just one of those kinds of people that, that wasn't really a big deal to him. His cousin John, another delegate, worried about leaving his wife, his children, and, quote, the poor cows. New England delegates adopted the wise strategy of remaining relatively quiet, allowing the Southerners to propose the radical measures. And whatever else, the intolerable acts had to be dealt with in a unified way. The Congress addressed letters to the King and the British people appealing for aid against the Parliament. All right. And King George III really ended up not doing a whole lot. Now, by April of 1775, General Gage had 4,000 troops. 4,000 troops in Boston. Recognizing that he was provoking without frightening, Gage begged for 20,000 troops. So again, they had enough soldiers there to really, make everybody mad, but not enough to when things got kind of crazy that somehow, they could do something about it. The king was listening as little to Gage as to anybody else. And matters came to a head in April of 1775, when Secretary of War ordered Gage to arrest the leaders of the Provincial Congress, John Hancock and Sam Adams, and to keep the rebels from acquiring weapons. Gage found out that the colonists, the Americans, were stockpiling weapons here in Concord. And so he ordered troops to go there, about 700 men, around 700 men, to go there and to arrest John Hancock and Sam Adams and to find the weapons. And they started over here in Boston, right? And they started marching this way. Well, by the time, probably before they even started marching, Sam Adams and John Hancock had already heard what was going on, and they hid um, the cache of weapons. And of course, this is where you hear the story of Paul Revere and others, going into the countryside, telling everybody, warning everyone, the British are coming, the British are coming. Okay. Now they made it to April 19th. They made it to Lexington. There was a little skirmish there. And by the time they made it to Concord, they didn't find anything, and so they headed back to Boston. Now, by that point, you had Minutemen all in, hiding in the woods, pretty much picking off British soldiers, hit and run tactics, what we would call guerrilla tactics. Guerre, that's a French word for war. It doesn't mean guerrilla like, a guerrilla. So guerrilla warfare is when you are fighting a conventional force and you yourself if you were to fight a conventional war with them, would lose because you don't have a strong conventional force. So in this case, the Americans did not have a strong conventional force. And what I mean by conventional, I mean in terms of, having a very structured army. Okay, but they had these Minutemen. And that's the great advantage of America. I mean, it would be very difficult to actually invade the United States and try to take over. I mean, if an enemy ever, takes over the United States and militarily, it would be hard to imagine how they would do that because, as you know, I mean, just imagine if somebody tried to invade in, Cameron Parish or tried to invade Louisiana. I mean, they wouldn't get past Cameron or Vermilion Parish. I mean, everybody over there has like 20 or 30 guns in their house at least. I don't even like guns that much. And when my father passed away, I inherited about 25 of them. All right, I got like 25 guns at the house. Okay, but anyway, so people in Cameron and Vermilion Parish, they'd probably have a good time, doing it. But anyway, all right, that's another story. So they were pretty much getting picked off all the way back. I have some figures here I wrote down. Let's see. By the time they reached Boston, the British, they had 73 dead, 146 wounded, and 26 missing. Some of them just left. Some of them said, "To hell with this," and they just went out and found like some country woman out there and shacked up with her, in Pennsylvania somewhere or whatever. All right. Had the Patriots or had the Americans been much more unified, it would have been much worse for the British. But anyway, so this is really the beginning of the American Revolution. And something that I want you to kind of remember is that the at the beginning of the Revolution, okay, so you could say that in 1775 or April 1775 is when the Revolution began. From 75 to 76, the Americans, again, I said this before, were fighting for their rights. Let me put as Englishmen. All right. Today we would be more gender sensitive, I guess, and not say Englishmen, but as citizens of England or something like that. But anyway, at that time, a lot of women did not have the same rights as Englishmen. So at that time, it was more accurate, I guess. And they were not against. They were not. Let me put not against the King of England, who was George III. But they would become, by 1776, against the king and for complete independence. And we'll talk about that later on. Okay, so you're gonna have on this material, I'm gonna put these lectures up. So for this week it's 4 lectures, and at Friday you will have a multiple choice quiz, and I'll keep it open throughout the weekend, but just try to knock that out. It's gonna be, I'm not sure how many questions, not that many questions at all. Just knock it out. I'm going to give you about 30 minutes to do it. I'm not going to give you, multiple chances this time. So, just watch the lectures, pay attention, read the book, and you're going to have just a short quiz Friday on this, okay? All right.